I call Alfred Ngaro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise and take a call on this urgent debate in regards to the State of Care 2015, the Children's Commissioner report. And Mr. Speaker, I rise to take a call, and one of the things, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to declare that I conflict of interest, in a sense that I've previously been part of those many reviews. So when they've talked about 14 reviews, I've actually been part of some of those 14 reviews, all the way back to Te Poai o Te Atatu. We also know about the baseline review. There are many, the Mick Brown report that talked about the sector. And so I want to just say there's, out of that whole speech, Mr. Ball, the one point that I absolutely agree with you, this has been happening for a very long time. Let's not, take away from that fact. This is not a new issue. The issue of abuse and neglect for our children, whether in custody or in care, has been an issue for some time. It has perplexed, it has challenged many governments, many institutions. So I don't think it's the right place to turn around and to actually blame just this government for what it's been doing. I think the challenge is, however, the responsibility of whoever is in government to be actually held to account to what it is that they're doing. And that's absolutely right, and that's the right thing for us to be able to do. And so this report, the Children's Commissioner report, does that. But in particular, I want to say that the focus of this report is around children, young persons and their family. And the reason I make that, because we've had some comments just from the previous speaker about the green paper, the white paper, and all of the initiatives that have come out there. Those forms of consultation and engagement with the whole of the sector was for the whole sector. Those initiatives, if the member wants to look through that, is around not just engaging those with statutory roles and responsibility, that is children, young persons and their families. It's about those who are community providers. It is about those in local government. It is about those who are actually in community delivering service. It's a whole of community and the whole of sector. So those still stand as an initiative so that the whole of the issues of concern are raised by the whole sector. So I don't think it's appropriate to actually bring those up, to hold those to account. They are held to account at the moment. The green paper, the white paper, the actions that have come out of that is the Vulnerable Children's Bill, is also the children's teams. We know those initiatives are currently in play as we speak at this moment. So those are to the side. What I will then address is the issues of this report, which is to hold to account the roles of responsibility statutory that are part of the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Act. So the first thing I want to state, as has been stated by the Minister, is that we welcome this report. We don't shy away from it. We don't turn around and hide from it. In fact, it's this sort of report that's important because it will hold us to account as to the direction and the vision both of the Minister, of the government, and our intent to address this very key issue. One of the points that were put up by Jan Logie was around the sense of urgency around this. In fact, she attacked the government saying there was not enough urgency around this, in particular around some of those recommendations. Mr. Speaker, it's quite clear that when we talk about the current, people keep using it as a review. We know there's been 14 different reviews. Currently at the moment, it is not a review that has been commissioned and initiated by the Minister or by this government. It's called an overhaul. And here's the difference. A review is when you go out, you'll survey, you'll research, you'll talk about things, and you'll come back and you look at some recommendations. An overhaul, Mr. Speaker, and coming from a trade, okay, it's like when you want to overhaul a car, right? You don't just turn around and sit and talk about it and analyse it. You get on with the business of taking it apart and putting it back together so it actually works as it has been intended. That's what an overhaul is about. So, Mr. Speaker, what this government is doing, what this minister is doing, is commission an overhaul. It started, by the way, in 2014, last year. The conversation began then. Then it was sent to Cabinet to get approval and was initiated at the beginning of this year, prior to this report. So I can actually absolutely say with confidence that this minister and this government has commissioned that initiative, not of a review, not another 14 to add to the 14 to make it 15. It's called an overhaul, a practical application to look at how we need to fix what has been put wrong, and we know that's what's happening there. So with Mr. Speaker, we think that's absolutely important as well. Mr. Speaker, the other point I want to talk about is the 7 recommendations. Mr. Speaker, there are 7 recommendations here. And again, I want to initiate and say that actually these recommendations have already been taken up and have already been addressed by the expert independent panel. This expert independent panel has already been looking at these. So what the report does, actually it validates the initiation, the conversation, and also to the recommendations that are already coming up out of the independent which is a review panel that's happening at the moment. Mr. Speaker, in the report, when one looks at the opening remarks of the report, there's a whakatauki that's been quoted by the Children's Commissioner, Dr. Russell Wills, and he simply states this: this whakatauki urges us to look at the uniqueness of the child to guide our work. In other words, the voice of the children, the concerns of the children, the thoughts of the children, so that they would be included. And again, I want to state this, that the Minister has already had an independent youth panel of children and young people from the ages of 15 to 23 who are already out there, who are looking at the way that we engage in the panel, in the organisation of SIP's children and young people and their family services. That's already happening. And so what we want to say is this: we welcome this report because it confirms the direction, it confirms the initiation of things that are happening. And here's one of the things that came out of those conversations with those young people. What do they desire most? They desire most with someone, a person, in a place of belonging where they have a connection and a sense of safety and well-being. That's what they desire most. So, Mr. Speaker, the whakatauki here from Dr. Russell Wills is leading and guiding the direction of the work that is already happening. Again, not a review, but an overhaul of the system, so it truly does meet the concerns that have been raised over here, Mr. Speaker. We think that's really important. Mr. Speaker, I just also too want to engage around in regards to the investment in this. There were some comments that were made by Mr. Ball in regards to the fact is that we're not putting enough money. Mr. Speaker, can I say this? Having been part of the system previously before, as I declared my conflict of interest, having been a practitioner in an NGO service that provided the very services, whether it would be parenting, family services, working with areas of abuse and the vulnerable in our communities, Mr. Speaker, the issues are not just about more resource. Actually, it's not just about more money. The resource is important, but what is just as important is the ability of those who are practitioners at the front line, is the ability to allow the system to be flexible enough to deal with the complexities of the issues that are there. Those are just as important. But just to prove to that member and others out there who may say that this government and this minister is not taking this urgently, again, this is in the 2015 budget. Prior to this report, $90 million of extra funds was actually put in. $90 million, Mr. Ball, you may want to hear this. In fact, I can even actually give you the budget. You may not have read the budget, Mr. Ball, but guaranteed the public that are out there that are listening to this debate can have confidence there's been an extra $90 million that is put into the baseline, so to ensure that those services are also adequately resourced for what they need to have. So let's summarise that. First of all, we've got an overhaul of the system that's happening. We think that's supported. Secondly, we know that 7 of the recommendations, in fact there are only 7, but all 7 of those recommendations have already been taken up by the independent review panel. Thirdly, we know that the voice of the children are factored into this whole process. Why? Because there's a youth panel. It's not just talk. Actually, there actually is a youth panel, 15 to 23-year-olds who've been factored into this report. And to finalise that, Mr. Speaker, we also have an extra resource of $90 million prior to this report have already been invested to ensure that our children and our young people are cared for. Mr. Speaker, we do take this seriously. As Mr. Ball has said, we do take this seriously, and we know that this is not just words, this is about actions. And Mr. Speaker, I want to remind the House this. This is not a day to turn around and to blame the government. This is about taking action of concern with these issues that are here. Mr. Speaker, I commend the actions of the Minister, the initiation and the vision of this government to ensure that we address and deal with the most vulnerable, and I commend the vision of this government.